It all started the night I decided to take a shortcut home through the woods. I've always been the kind of person who prefers the direct route, and when my car broke down just a mile from home, I figured walking through the forest trail would save me half the time. I'd used the path before during the day, so even though it was dark, I felt confident. I had my phone flashlight, and the moon was peeking through the thick canopy of trees. What could go wrong? The air was crisp and the woods were eerily quiet. I could hear my own footsteps crunching on the dried leaves and the faint rustling of animals scurrying away from the light. At first, it was almost peaceful, the kind of silence you only get far away from the noise of the city. But as I moved deeper into the woods, the stillness became oppressive, like the trees themselves were watching me. About 10 minutes in, I started hearing faint noises behind me. At first, I thought it was just paranoia. You know, your mind playing tricks on you when you're alone in the dark. But then, I heard it again. The unmistakable sound of leaves crunching underfoot. Someone or something was following me. I stopped and whipped my flashlight around, scanning the trees. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. No answer, just silence. I told myself it was probably a deer or maybe even a stray dog. But as I started walking again, the footsteps behind me picked up, matching my pace. My heartbeat quickened and I could feel the adrenaline surging through me. I tried to act calm, speeding up slightly, but not so much that it looked like I was running. Whoever it was, if it even was a person, I didn't want to show fear. That's what predators go for, right? Fear. The footsteps quickened too. My stomach dropped. I spun around again, aiming my phone's flashlight down the trail. For a second, I thought I saw something dart behind a tree, but it was too quick to make out. My hands were shaking now, and the pale light from my phone wobbled erratically as I scanned the woods. "If someone's there, this isn't funny," I shouted, trying to sound tough. Nothing. Just when I was about to start walking again, I heard a low, guttural laugh. It was quiet, almost like it was trying to stay hidden, but it was unmistakable. My blood turned to ice. That was no animal. I turned back around and started walking as fast as I could without breaking into a full sprint. The path was uneven, with roots sticking out of the ground like they were trying to trip me, and the last thing I wanted was to fall. But the footsteps behind me didn't care. They got louder, closer, heavier. Whoever was following me was no longer trying to hide. I broke into a run. My breath came in ragged gasps and the flashlight bounced wildly, barely illuminating the path ahead. The laughter followed me, louder now, echoing through the trees like it was coming from all directions. I didn't dare look back. My only thought was to get out of those woods as fast as I could. And then I tripped. My foot caught on one of those cursed roots and I went down hard, scraping my hands and knees on the gravelly dirt. My phone flew out of my hand and skittered a few feet away, the light facing upward and casting eerie shadows on the trees. I scrambled to grab it, my ears straining for the sound of approaching footsteps, but there was nothing. No laughter. No footsteps. Just silence. For a moment I thought maybe I'd imagined it all. Maybe the fear had gotten to me and my mind had played some cruel tricks. But then I saw it. Standing about 20 feet away, partially hidden by the shadows of the trees, was a figure. It wasn't moving, just standing there, watching me. The light from my phone was dim, but it was enough to make out the silhouette. It was tall, impossibly tall, with arms that seemed too long for its body. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its gaze boring into me. "Who are you?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. The figure tilted its head like it was curious, but it didn't answer. Instead, it took a slow, deliberate step forward. I froze. It took another step, and then another. I grabbed my phone and stumbled to my feet, backing away as fast as I could without falling again. The figure kept advancing, its movements unnaturally fluid, almost serpentine. I turned and ran, not caring about the noise or the uneven path. My only thought was to get to the edge of the woods where the streetlights and houses would be, where there would be other people. Safety. The laughter started again, louder this time, and closer. It was coming from right behind me. I burst out of the woods and onto the street, my chest heaving and my legs burning. I didn't stop running until I was halfway down the block, where the warm glow of a streetlight made me feel a little safer. Only then did I dare to look back. The woods were dark, the trail barely visible beyond the edge of the trees. There was no sign of the figure, no sound, just the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind. For a moment I thought I was safe. But then I saw them, two glowing eyes high up in the trees staring at me from the darkness, and below them the faint outline of that impossibly tall figure standing just at the edge of the woods, as if it couldn't cross the boundary. Watching, waiting. I didn't sleep that night. I double-checked every lock on every door and window, pulled the curtains closed, and left every light in the house on. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The next day I told myself it was over. Whatever I'd seen, whatever had followed me, it was still out there in the woods. As long as I didn't go back, I'd be fine. But then the noises started. It began with faint tapping on my bedroom window at night. At first I thought it was just the wind or a stray branch, but when I finally worked up the courage to peek through the blinds, there was nothing there. Just an empty yard bathed in moonlight. The tapping turned into scratching, faint but deliberate, like someone running their nails along the glass. And then came the laughter. The same low, guttural laugh I'd heard in the woods, echoing softly through the night. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, that I was just jumpy after what happened, but deep down I knew better. The final straw came 3 nights later. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of my front door creaking open. My heart stopped. I knew I'd locked it. I was sure of it. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the operator that someone was in my house. The operator told me to stay on the line and lock myself in a room until the police arrived. I crept to my bedroom door and locked it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. And then I heard it. The laughter, right outside my door. I pressed myself against the wall, clutching my phone like it was a lifeline. The door handle rattled, slowly at first, then violently, like someone was trying to force it open. The laughter grew louder, more manic, and then it just stopped. The silence was worse. I stayed there, frozen, until I heard the distant sound of sirens. When the police arrived, they found no signs of forced entry. No footprints. Nothing. The laughter, right outside my door. I pressed myself against the wall, clutching my phone like it was a lifeline. The door handle rattled, slowly at first, then violently, like someone was trying to force it open. The laughter grew louder, more manic, and then it just stopped. The silence was worse. I stayed there, frozen, until I heard the distant sound of sirens. When the police arrived, they found no signs of forced entry. No footprints. Nothing. The police arrived. They found no signs of forced entry. No footprints. Nothing. I moved out of that house the next week. I don't know what I saw in those woods or why it followed me. But even now, years later, I still see those glowing eyes in my nightmares, and sometimes late at night I think I can hear faint laughter in the distance. Whatever it was, it's still out there, watching, waiting. It all started with an email. I'd been working from home for months, drowning in monotony. When I got the invitation to a remote cabin retreat, I thought it was a godsend. The email was from an old college friend, Mark. We hadn't spoken in years, but his message sounded warm and genuine. He wrote about how he and a few other mutual friends had planned a long weekend to reconnect and unwind in a cabin deep in the woods. No cell service, no stress, he said. I hesitated at first. The thought of being disconnected from everything made me uneasy, but I figured it was exactly what I needed. A break from the endless emails and the hum of my computer. Plus, it'd be great to see Mark again. We spent the evening catching up, sharing drinks, and playing old board games we'd loved in college. The isolation of the cabin, combined with the warmth of friendship, made it feel like a bubble of safety and comfort. But that bubble didn't last. The drive to the cabin took hours, with the final stretch being a dirt road barely wide enough for my car. The forest on either side was dense, the kind that swallowed up sunlight even on a bright day. By the time I arrived, the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The cabin sat in a clearing, modest but charming, with smoke curling lazily from the chimney. Mark's beat-up truck was parked outside, and I spotted 2 other cars as well. I recognized one as belonging to Sarah, another friend from college. I knocked on the door and Mark opened it almost instantly, grinning from ear to ear. "Hey, you made it," he said, pulling me into a bear hug. Inside, the cabin was warm and cozy, with a fire crackling in the stone fireplace. Sarah was there, along with Jake and Olivia, 2 other friends I hadn't seen in years. The reunion was filled with laughter and nostalgia. For the first time in a long while, I felt genuinely happy. The first strange thing happened in the middle of the night. I woke up to the sound of footsteps creaking on the wooden floorboards. At first, I assumed it was just one of the others heading to the bathroom, but the steps were too slow, deliberate, almost calculated. They moved from the living room toward the hallway where the bedrooms were. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. The footsteps stopped just outside my door. I held my breath, straining to hear. Then nothing, just silence. After a few minutes, I convinced myself it was my imagination and managed to fall back asleep. The next morning, over breakfast, I mentioned the footsteps. Sarah's face went pale, and she said she'd heard them too. "I thought it was one of you," she admitted, looking around the table. Mark and Jake shrugged it off, laughing about how old cabins make weird noises. Olivia, however, looked uneasy. "It didn't sound like creaking wood," she said softly. "It sounded like someone walking." We decided not to dwell on it and spent the day hiking and exploring the woods. The fresh air and exercise did wonders to lift our spirits, but as the sun dipped below the horizon, a sense of unease crept back in. That night, things escalated. Around midnight, we were sitting in the living room playing cards and joking around when the power went out. The cabin was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the dying embers in the fireplace. Mark fumbled for a flashlight and managed to light a few candles, but the mood had shifted. The laughter was gone, replaced by nervous chatter. Then came the knocking. It was soft at first, almost imperceptible. 3 slow, deliberate knocks at the front door. We all froze. Mark stood up, his face serious. "It's probably just a branch or something," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. He opened the door to reveal nothing but darkness. The forest beyond the clearing was impenetrable, a wall of black. He closed the door, locking it this time. "See? Nothing," he said, trying to sound cheerful. But none of us felt reassured. As the night wore on, the knocking continued, now coming from different parts of the cabin. The back door, the windows, even the walls. It was rhythmic, deliberate, and it felt purposeful. Like whoever or whatever was out there wanted us to know they were there. Panic set in. Jake suggested we all stay in one room, so we gathered in the living room, barricading the doors with furniture. The knocking stopped, but the silence was worse. It was the kind of silence that made your ears ring, where every little creak and groan of the cabin felt magnified. Then came the whispering. At first I thought I was imagining it, but when I looked at the others, their wide eyes told me they heard it too. It was faint, almost indistinguishable from the sound of the wind. But it was there. Words we couldn't understand, spoken in a voice that was both low and rasping. We barely slept that night. Morning couldn't come fast enough. When the first rays of sunlight broke through the trees, we decided to leave. But when we stepped outside, we found something that made my stomach drop. Footprints. They were human, barefoot, and led in a chaotic pattern around the cabin. They were fresh, the edges of the prints still sharp in the damp earth. Mark tried to laugh it off, saying it was probably a prank. But as we packed up our things, I noticed something else. The cars. All 4 of them had deep scratches running along their sides, as if someone had dragged a sharp object across the paint. Jake cursed under his breath, inspecting the damage. "This isn't a prank," he muttered. We hurried to load our things into the cars, but when I turned to look at the cabin one last time, I froze. In one of the windows, I saw a face. Pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare directly at me. I blinked, and it was gone. We drove back to civilization in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. None of us ever spoke about what happened that weekend again. The cabin was torn down a few years later, replaced by a modern vacation home. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone, I'll hear faint knocking at my door. And every time I'll remember that face in the window and wonder if the unseen guest ever truly left. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept picturing that hidden room in the basement. The old mattress, the dusty table. It looked lived in at some point. Who had stayed down there? And why? My imagination was running wild. I told myself it was just an old storage area, long forgotten, but something about it didn't sit right with me. Around 3 a.m., I finally drifted off, only to wake up to the sound of faint creaking. My heart immediately raced as I tried to figure out where it was coming from. It sounded like it was coming from below me, from the basement. I sat up in bed, straining to listen. The noise stopped for a moment, and I thought maybe I'd imagined it. But then I heard it again. Soft, deliberate creaks like footsteps on the wooden basement stairs. Fear gripped me. I wasn't sure what to do. Should I call the police? Or was it possible I was just being paranoid? After all, old houses make noise. Maybe the wind was rattling something down there. I decided to grab the baseball bat I kept in my closet for protection and quietly made my way to the basement door in the kitchen. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I could still hear faint noises, but they had stopped moving up the stairs. It was like whoever or whatever was down there knew I was listening. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I slowly opened the basement door. The creaking hinge echoed in the silence. I switched on the light and peered down the wooden stairs. The basement looked just as I'd left it, silent, still, and empty. The hidden door on the far wall was latched shut, just like I'd left it. I felt a wave of relief and cursed myself for being so paranoid. Maybe I'd left something unbalanced and it had fallen over, making the noise. I turned off the light, shut the door, and locked it, convincing myself it was nothing. But the next night, things got worse. I was lying in bed again, staring at my ceiling, unable to sleep. My mind kept drifting back to that hidden room. Around 2 a.m., I heard it again. The faint creak of footsteps on the basement stairs. This time they were louder, heavier. I grabbed my phone and bat and crept to the kitchen. My heart pounded as I stood in front of the basement door. I could hear the creaks, closer now, like something, or someone, was slowly ascending the stairs. Without thinking, I yanked the door open, flipped on the light, and shouted, "Who's there?" Nothing. The stairs were empty. The basement below was silent, bathed in the harsh yellow glow of the light. The hidden door was still latched. I stood there shaking for what felt like an eternity before slamming the basement door shut and locking it again. At this point, I couldn't ignore the possibility that someone might be down there. The noises were too deliberate to be the house settling. But how? I hadn't seen any signs of forced entry, and the hidden room looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I called my landlord the next morning and demanded he come over to check the basement with me. He seemed annoyed, brushing it off as my imagination, but when I told him about the hidden room, he paused. "What hidden room?" he asked. I explained what I'd found, and his tone shifted. "That's impossible," he said. "I've owned this house for over a decade, and there's no hidden room in the basement." Now I was panicking. Was he lying? Or did he really not know about it? He reluctantly agreed to come by later that day to inspect it. When he arrived, I led him down into the basement, but when I pointed to the door, something was wrong. The door was gone. I stared at the wall where the door had been just 2 nights before. It was seamless now, like it had never existed. My landlord gave me a strange look, like I'd wasted his time. "There's nothing here," he said. "Probably just a bad dream or something." I knew what I had seen. I knew there had been a door there. But now it was like the house itself was gaslighting me. My landlord left, shaking his head, and I was left alone with a sinking feeling in my stomach. That night I was too scared to sleep. I left every light in the house on and stayed curled up on the couch with the bat in my lap. Around midnight, I heard it again, the creaking of footsteps, but this time, they weren't coming from the basement. They were coming from the hallway. My blood turned to ice. Slowly, I turned my head toward the dark hallway that led to the bedrooms. The light in the hallway flickered, and for a brief moment, I saw it. A figure stood at the end of the hall, shrouded in shadow. It was tall, with a hunched posture and a head that tilted unnaturally to the side, like it was studying me. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its eyes on me. I froze, unable to move or even scream. The figure took a step closer and then another. Its movements were slow, deliberate, and wrong, like it didn't belong in this world. Finally, my instincts kicked in. I grabbed my phone and bolted out the front door, not even bothering to grab my shoes. I ran to my car, locked the doors, and called the police. When the officers arrived, they searched the house from top to bottom but found nothing. No sign of forced entry, no intruders, no hidden doors. They told me it was probably a combination of stress and an overactive imagination. But I know what I saw. I moved out of that house a week later, breaking my lease and losing my security deposit. I didn't care. I just couldn't stay there another night. To this day, I don't know what was in that basement or what I saw in the hallway. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that door, the one that disappeared, and I wonder if whatever was behind it is still there, waiting for someone else to find it.